"You're just a foolish old man, Raymond," the insurance clerk had muttered dismissively, sliding the rejection letter across the counter with cold indifference. But that autumn day in Maple Creek, when love collided with desperation, neither the clerk nor anyone else could have predicted the thunderous wave of compassion that one grandfather's sacrifice would unleash across the country. Hello everyone, welcome to Unveiled Narratives. Today, I bring you a story that will restore your faith in humanity and remind you that sometimes the most unexpected heroes emerge from the rumble of motorcycle engines. In the quiet town of Maple Creek, where autumn leaves danced on cracked pavement and the scent of old wood mingled with rain, lived Raymond Cole. At 70, this retired railroad engineer and Vietnam veteran had built a simple life around three things: his morning coffee, his cherished garden, and the gleaming chrome of his 1988 Harley-Davidson Heritage Classic. Raymond's daily routine was as predictable as the sunrise. Each morning at 5:30 a.m., he would shuffle to the kitchen in his worn slippers, brew a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and settle into his late wife's favorite chair by the window. The view overlooked his meticulously maintained garden, where tomatoes grew in perfect rows and sunflowers stretched toward the sky like yellow prayers. But it was the garage that held his most precious possession, that magnificent Harley, waiting patiently for their morning ritual. That motorcycle wasn't just a machine, it was a time capsule of love. For decades, Ray and his beloved wife Evelyn had carved their initials into the highways of America, exploring mountain trails, endless coastlines, and forgotten backroads. Every mile they traveled together became a memory sealed in chrome and leather, a testament to 42 years of marriage that death had ended but love had preserved. Their adventures had been legendary among their friends. There was the summer they rode to Alaska, camping under northern lights that painted the sky in impossible colors. The spontaneous trip to New Orleans for their 25th anniversary, where Evelyn had insisted they dance in the French Quarter until dawn. The quiet Sunday rides through Indiana farmland, where they would stop at roadside diners and share pie while watching the world go by. Evelyn had been more than a passenger. She had been his riding partner in every sense. She knew when to lean into curves, when to hold tighter on mountain passes, and when to simply rest her head against his back and trust the road ahead. Her laughter had been the soundtrack to their journeys, carried on the wind like music only they could hear. 5 years had passed since ovarian cancer claimed Evelyn, leaving Ray with nothing but photographs, memories, and that beautiful Harley. The bike had become his cathedral, his daily ritual of remembrance. Each morning he would polish its chrome until it sparkled like captured sunlight, running his weathered hands over surfaces that had once known Evelyn's touch. The garage walls were covered with photos of their adventures, Ray and Evelyn standing beside the bike at the Grand Canyon, laughing in the rain outside a diner in Montana, posing with other bikers at rallies from coast to coast. Each photograph told a story of love lived fully, of dreams pursued without hesitation, of a partnership that had weathered every storm. But life has a cruel way of forcing impossible choices upon those who have already lost everything. Ray's world revolved around one precious soul, his 9-year-old granddaughter, Emily. 3 years earlier, a devastating car accident had stolen her parents, Ray's son Michael and daughter-in-law Sarah, leaving Ray to raise her alone. The tragedy had struck on a Tuesday evening in December when black ice and a moment's inattention had changed everything forever. He had embraced this responsibility with every fiber of his being, transforming his quiet bachelor existence into a whirlwind of childhood wonder. Their modest home filled with bedtime stories, piano lessons, and daily affirmations that she was brave enough to face any storm. Emily had brought light back into corners of his heart that had been dark since Evelyn's passing. The little girl had her grandmother's eyes, bright green and full of mischief, and her father's stubborn determination. She loved hearing stories about her grandmother Evelyn, especially the motorcycle adventures, and would spend hours sitting in the garage while Ray worked on the bike, asking endless questions about engines and chrome and the open road. "Grandpa Ray," she would say, her small hands tracing the bike's curves, "when I'm big enough, will you teach me to ride?" "When you're ready, sweetheart," he would answer, his voice thick with emotion. "When you're ready, we'll ride together. But some storms are too fierce for courage alone." The diagnosis came like a lightning strike on a clear day: juvenile polymyositis, a rare autoimmune disorder that was systematically attacking Emily's muscles. Dr. Martinez had delivered the news in his office, surrounded by diplomas and medical texts that suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. The words inflammation, muscle weakness, chronic condition fell like stones into the silence between them. Each day brought new challenges. The fatigue that made climbing stairs feel like scaling mountains, leaving Emily breathless and frustrated. The pain that stole her childhood laughter, replacing it with quiet winces and careful movements. The gradual weakness that threatened to cage her vibrant spirit, making simple tasks like opening jars or carrying her backpack impossible struggles. Ray watched his granddaughter's world shrink day by day. The piano lessons stopped first, her fingers too weak to press the keys with confidence. Then the playground visits, where she could only watch other children climb and swing while she sat on a bench, her small frame betraying her with each attempted movement. The worst moments were when she tried to hide her pain, forcing smiles and pretending everything was fine for his sake. The doctors prescribed an aggressive treatment plan, painting pictures of hope with their medical terminology and pharmaceutical promises. Immunosuppressants, corticosteroids, physical therapy 3 times a week, and regular monitoring that would stretch for years. But hope, Ray learned, comes with a price tag that can break a grandfather's heart. The insurance company's response was swift and merciless, partial coverage only. The remaining balance, $13,700, fell like a mountain on Ray's shoulders. His monthly pension of $1,200, barely enough to cover their basic needs of rent, groceries, and utilities, couldn't even approach such a sum. Ray spent sleepless nights at his kitchen table, surrounded by medical bills and insurance forms, a calculator, and a rapidly dwindling bank account statement. He had sold Evelyn's jewelry, her collection of vintage teacups, even the antique rocking chair where she used to read. But even combined with his savings, it wasn't enough. Standing in Emily's hospital room, watching her small frame dwarfed by medical equipment, Ray made a decision that would echo far beyond the borders of Maple Creek. The machines beeped steadily, monitoring her condition, while Roman 4 lines delivered medications that cost more per day than he had once earned in a week. Emily slept fitfully, her breathing shallow, her face pale against the white hospital pillows. "I'm going to make this right, sweetheart," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Grandpa's going to take care of everything." Harper's Garage and Motorcycle Exchange sat on the outskirts of town, a weathered building that specialized in classic bikes and the stories they carried. Ray had driven past it countless times, never imagining he would one day walk through its doors as a seller rather than an admirer. The night before, he had sat in his garage until nearly dawn just looking at the Harley. He talked to it as if it were an old friend, which in many ways it was. He told it about Emily's condition, about the impossible choice he faced, about how sorry he was for what he had to do. "You've been good to us, old girl," he said, his voice breaking. "You carried us through the best times of our lives. Now I need you to carry us through the worst." The autumn air bit at his face as he rode the Harley one last time, every mile a goodbye he wasn't ready to say. He took the long way to the dealership, through the countryside where he and Evelyn had ridden so many Sunday afternoons. The corn was ready for harvest, golden stalks swaying in the breeze, and the maple trees were dressed in their finest autumn colors. The engine's familiar rumble seemed to whisper Evelyn's name, and for a moment Ray could almost feel her arms around his waist, her laughter carried on the wind. He could almost hear her voice, encouraging him as she always had. "Do what you need to do, Ray. Love always finds a way." At the dealership, his hands trembled as he handed over the keys to a young clerk named Danny who couldn't possibly understand the weight of what he was surrendering. The paperwork felt like signing away a piece of his soul. "She's been with me longer than most people," Ray said softly, his voice carrying the weight of decades. 23 years through everything life threw at us. But I've got someone else who needs saving now." Danny's eyes showed respect for the gravity of the moment. He was young, maybe 25, with calloused hands that spoke of his own love for motorcycles. "We'll take good care of her, Mr. Cole. That's a hell of a thing you're doing." The check, $11,400, felt both heavy and light in Ray's pocket, heavy with the weight of sacrifice, light with the hope it represented for Emily's future. Neither of them noticed the man standing in the corner, watching the exchange with growing emotion. Leo Armstrong, a travel blogger and member of the Rust Road Riders, an online community of motorcycle enthusiasts, had been browsing the dealership's vintage collection when he witnessed something that would change everything. He was researching a story about classic American motorcycles when he saw an elderly man in a worn denim jacket carefully negotiating the sale of a pristine heritage classic. Leo saw the crack in Ray's voice. The way his fingers lingered on the chrome gas tank one last time, tracing patterns that held decades of memories. He witnessed the defeated slope of the man's shoulders as he turned to leave, and the way he paused at the door for one last look at the bike that had been his companion for so many years. In that moment, Leo understood he wasn't just watching a transaction, he was witnessing love in its purest, most sacrificial form. The story poured out of Danny, the young clerk, who had been moved by Ray's situation. A grandfather selling his most precious possession to save his granddaughter's life. A love story that transcended the boundaries of the ordinary. That evening, Leo sat at his computer in his small apartment, struggling to find words for what he had witnessed. He had written about motorcycle culture for years, covering rallies and clubs and the open road philosophy that bound riders together. But this was different. This was about something deeper than horsepower and chrome. Finally, he typed a simple title, "A Grandfather's Last Ride, Help Him Ride Again." The post began with a photo Leo had discreetly taken, Ray's weathered hands on the Harley's handlebars, his face reflected in the chrome, showing a lifetime of love and loss. The story that followed was simple and direct, no dramatic flourishes needed. Just the truth of a man who had lost everything twice and was now sacrificing his last connection to happiness for someone he loved more than life itself. The post wasn't just shared, it exploded across the internet like wildfire. Within 48 hours, it had been reposted in 10 different motorcycle communities. By the end of the week, veteran biker clubs, charity riders, and custom builders across the Midwest knew Ray Cole's story. The comments section became a testament to the power of human connection. Vietnam veterans who understood Ray's service history, grandparents who felt his love for Emily, cancer survivors who remembered their own family's sacrifices, bikers who had lost their own riding partners and knew the sacred bond between a rider and their machine. "This is what we ride for," wrote one member of the Iron Eagles MC. "Not just the road, but the people we meet along the way. My grandfather would have done the same thing," added a woman from Oregon. Love doesn't count the cost. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured in from strangers who had never met Ray but understood the universal language of love and sacrifice. A retired nurse in Utah volunteered to travel to Maple Creek Hospital to help with Emily's care. A custom shop in Denver offered to rebuild any bike Ray wanted free of charge. A medical equipment company pledged supplies for Emily's home care. But the bikers had something bigger in mind, something that would transform one grandfather's quiet sacrifice into a thunderous declaration of human goodness. 2 weeks later, Maple Creek experienced something unprecedented. The planning had been meticulous, coordinated through social media and phone calls that connected riders from dozens of states. The Rust Road riders had reached out to every motorcycle club, charity organization, and individual rider they could find. The response had been overwhelming. The town that had known only the gentle rustle of autumn leaves and the occasional car engine suddenly trembled with the sound of 200 motorcycles rolling down Main Street. Chrome flashed like lightning bolts in the morning sun as the massive convoy approached Ray's modest home. The procession was a rolling museum of American motorcycle culture. Vintage Harleys rumbled alongside modern sport bikes. Custom choppers with flames painted on their gas tanks rode next to touring bikes loaded with camping gear. There were police motorcycles driven by off-duty officers who had heard the story. Military veterans on bikes decorated with unit patches and memorial flags. Women riders who had organized fundraisers in their communities. Neighbors emerged from their houses in bathrobes and pajamas, children ran to sidewalks with wide eyes, and even the town mayor appeared on his porch, drawn by the extraordinary sight. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door, had been complaining about Ray's noisy motorcycle for years. Now she stood on her porch with tears in her eyes, understanding for the first time what that bike had meant to him. The procession wasn't just impressive, it was a statement. Here were people from dozens of states, representing every walk of life imaginable. There were veterans who understood Ray's service, grandparents who felt his love for Emily, and countless others who simply believed that good people deserved good things. Ray emerged from his house in flannel pajamas and worn slippers, his face a mixture of confusion and wonder. He had been awakened by what sounded like thunder, but the sky was clear. Emily sat by the window in her wheelchair, her thin frame animated by excitement for the first time in months. "Grandpa, look," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "It's like a parade just for us." At the front of the crowd stood Leo Armstrong, helmet tucked under his arm, his eyes bright with emotion. Beside him stood representatives from a dozen motorcycle clubs, their leather jackets bearing patches from across the country. The Iron Eagles from Illinois, the Road Warriors from Texas, the Thunder Riders from Colorado, all united by a story that had touched their hearts. "Mr. Cole," Leo called out, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "on behalf of every rider who's ever known what it means to love, to lose, and to ride again, we brought something back to you." What happened next would be talked about in Maple Creek for decades to come. The crowd parted like a sea, revealing not one but two motorcycles. The first was a masterpiece of restoration, a reconstructed 1988 Heritage Classic that gleamed with fresh paint and polished chrome. But this wasn't just any bike. Custom touches made it uniquely meaningful. Evelyn's name was etched delicately on the rear fender in flowing script, while a tiny angel bearing Emily's initials was engraved near the speedometer. The seat had been roof-upholstered in leather that matched the original, and the chrome had been polished to a mirror finish that reflected the autumn sky. The second motorcycle made Ray's knees buckle. It was his original Harley, the very one he had sold just weeks before. A collector from Chicago named Marcus Williams had purchased it from Harper's Garage, but upon hearing Ray's story online had driven through the night to return it. Marcus, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and grease-stained hands, simply nodded and said, "Some things don't belong in collections, they belong in hearts." But the bikers weren't finished. Leo approached Ray with a large envelope, his hand steady despite the emotion in his voice. "And one more thing," he said, extending the envelope. Inside was a check for $42,000, enough to cover 3 full years of Emily's treatment and rehabilitation, with money left over for whatever challenges lay ahead. The money had come from everywhere. Individual donations from riders who had read the story, proceeds from emergency fundraisers organized by clubs across the country, and contributions from motorcycle dealers who had been moved by Ray's sacrifice. Ray stood frozen, blinking back tears that had been building for months. Around him, 200 engines idled softly, their riders silent witnesses to a moment that transcended the ordinary boundaries of human kindness. "I don't understand," Ray whispered, his voice barely audible above the rumble of engines. "Why would you do this for strangers?" "Because we're not strangers," replied Maria Santos, president of the Lady Riders chapter from California. "We're family, and family takes care of family." Emily, who had been watching from her wheelchair, slowly stood up. The crowd held its breath as she took careful steps toward the motorcycles, her small hand reaching out to touch the chrome. She looked up at Ray, her green eyes bright with tears and joy. "Grandpa, does this mean we can ride together?" Ray knelt down beside her, his own eyes wet with tears. "Yes, sweetheart, we can ride together." A week later, after Emily's first successful treatment had brought color back to her cheeks and strength to her steps, Ray suited up for his first ride in months. Emily, wearing a helmet slightly too large for her small head, giggled as she climbed onto the bike behind him. The new Harley roared to life, its engine singing a song of hope and renewal. Behind them, a dozen bikers followed, old veterans, medical professionals, artists, and strangers who had become family, all now part of the same tribe. They rode slowly through Maple Creek's quiet roads, waving to neighbors who had become part of their story. As they rode, some witnesses swear they saw something magical in the wind. Perhaps it was Evelyn's presence in the breeze that played with Emily's hair, or maybe it was simply the sunlight dancing on the road ahead, blessing this new chapter of their lives. This story didn't end with Ray's restored faith or Emily's improving health. It became a catalyst for something much larger. The Rust Road Riders established a permanent fund for medical emergencies, helping dozens of other families facing impossible choices. Harper's Garage began hosting annual charity rides, and Maple Creek transformed from a quiet town into a symbol of community compassion. But perhaps the most important legacy was the simplest: the reminder that in a world often focused on division and difference, love remains the universal language that connects us all. Ray Cole thought he was simply selling a motorcycle to save his granddaughter. He never imagined that his act of quiet sacrifice would inspire 200 strangers to become family, or that his story would remind thousands of people that goodness still exists in the world. We often hear about everything that's wrong with our world: the cruelty, the indifference, the ways we fail each other. But sometimes, in the rumble of engines and the kindness of strangers, we are reminded of everything that's still right. This wasn't just about a bike. It was about love, sacrifice, and the road that connects us all. As Ray and Emily continue their journey together, their story serves as a powerful reminder that our greatest acts of love often come in our darkest moments. When we choose to sacrifice for others, when we open our hearts to strangers, when we believe that good people deserve good things, we become part of something larger than ourselves. The next time you hear the rumble of motorcycle engines, remember Ray Cole and the 200 bikers who proved that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most difficult choices. Thank you for joining us on Unveiled Narratives. If this story moved you, please like this article, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you stories that remind us of the best of humanity. Until next time, keep believing in the power of love to transform the world, one act of kindness at a time.